welcome again to another meeting of the Rotary Club of Livermore. And so, Ken M., would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? So Ken, you'll need to unmute yourself. Everybody else, keep yourselves on mute.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Ken. And now for our songsters, I think, Michael, you are going to introduce our song for the day.
Live from Carmel, California.
Do it again. Sorry, Michael. Or sorry, Alan. Christina, thought for the day.
Hi, yes. So I will try to be brief. I have, when presenting the thought for the day, I was really inspired by this quote. Actually, I think it's the next slide. I put together just one little quote, which I actually did not get from Nietzsche. I got from reading the most recent book that I've been reading on the plane during my travels. It's by Viktor Frankl called Man's Search for Meaning. So it's kind of a quote of a quote. Viktor Frankl quotes him and he says, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how." And I just was really, really touched by this recently. I think, you know, he writes in this book, as he says, it does not really matter what we expected from life, but rather what life expected from us. And I think that's very touching and very important in these days, because obviously life is not anything we expected it to be right now. And in thinking of Rotary, you know, it's even on our masthead, it says we are people of action. And he writes in this book, sometimes the situation in which a man finds himself requires him to shape his own fate by action, you know. And I think even though we're not having a crab feed, we're not having, you know, all these things we wanted and looked forward to and expected, Rotary is still, our why is so strong for us. Our why is driving us, and we're still meeting, we're still making that happen in spite of this. And so found that very empowering, and I hope you all do too. And there's a little picture of my why is Jude when he was very, very little. He's much bigger now.
Thank you very much, Christina. And now here we are. Oh, we do have Sheila as our part of our meeting front line. So Sheila did a great job greeting everybody in our half an hour that started at noon. Pat Coyle is our spur reporter today. As always, Alan is operating the AVs as well as creating them. Don Wentz will publish the spur this week. Jeff continues to be our Zoom host extraordinaire, and David Rounds is monitoring the chat and the Zoom chat. Thank you all. And so this is time to introduce any visiting Rotarians and guests. So do we have any visiting Rotarians? If you're a visiting Rotarian, please unmute yourself and introduce yourself, or have somebody else introduce you.
I will introduce myself. Although it says Donacombe Bregman, it's my wife's computer. I'm Bernie Bregman, and I'm the brother of Norman Bregman.
Welcome, Norman. Welcome, Bernie. Nice to have you back again. Any other visiting Rotarians with us today? Do we have any guests and people who would like to introduce guests today?
Yes, I have a guest. Joyce Brown is with us again this week. She's the wife of the late Paul Brown, a former Rotarian.
Welcome, Joyce. Thank you for joining us again. Nice to see you again. Any other guests? Christina, did you want to introduce your son? Is he still with us?
He is doing math in the other room, which is why I ran in frantically. But He's kind of
Okay.
here with me.
All right. Any other guests? I think we've welcomed everybody. Thank you very much. So up next, as I've told you, this is an update, and this is my last kind of heat map for my walkabout. I last weekend finished walking all the streets in Livermore. So this is what it looks like if you walk every street within the city limits of Livermore. But before I show you my photo that I actually took on Saturday, I want everybody to guess, either write it down for yourself, put it in your head, or put it in the chat. What do you think on the Livermore city limits signs is the population and the elevation? Doot, 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 doot. Okay, get that written down, think about it, and here you go. The population of the city of Livermore is over 91,000, and our elevation is 495. I thought it would be cool and very serendipitous if my total mileage was 495 miles for my walkabout, but it was actually 499. All right. So next, we want to congratulate and welcome Jeff Youngsma and Norm Bregman, who are transitioning from their red badge status to their blue badge status. And Sonia was going to do this welcome today, but she woke up with a frog in her throat, so asked me to do that. And I think that we also have another musical interlude we want to share with you. And you can see that they got their badges. So do we have one before, actually, Alan, before the birthdays, do we have the one for red badge to blue badge? Do we have that song?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, all right. We will play that again for you another time. Welcome, and Jeff and Norm for being becoming Rotarians, full members and blue badge members of the Rotary Club of Livermore. All right, so birthdays and anniversaries. I just want to let you know that we had a little bit of confusion last week, and I should have picked it up because my anniversary is in August, and I should have remembered that. So we were able to play catch up and celebrate all of our members who were celebrating birthdays and anniversaries in August last week. And today we'll look for September, and just know that this is a way all of our members are important members, and we want to recognize each of you. So now for the September birthdays and anniversaries.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Rotarians. Happy birthday to you. Let me call you sweetheart. I'm in love with you. Let me hear you whisper that you love me too. Keep the love light glowing in your eyes so true. Let me call you sweetheart. I'm in love with you.
So thank you very much, Alan and Stu, for putting that recognition together, and happy birthday and happy anniversary to you all. So Pat McMiniman is going to join us now to give an update on the Rotary International Foundation, or TRF, and every Rotarian every year. Pat.
Thank you, President Carolyn, fellow Rotarians and guests. As you know, during President Carolyn's first meeting, she asked each of us to donate at least $25 or more to the Rotary Foundation's annual fund or Polio Plus fund. And each year, the Rotary Foundation challenges Rotary clubs everywhere to achieve the goal of every Rotarian in the club making a donation to the Rotary Foundation of RI. So from July 1st through today, I'm happy to report we have made very good progress. I'd like you to join me in a virtual round of applause for the 19 members of our club whose combined donations to the Rotary Foundation of RI since July 1 is, as of today, a total of $19,739. So I wish we could do the live round of applause, but that's just spectacular. So President Carolyn and I express our gratitude and appreciation for the generous donations of these 19 members of our club who have already given to the Rotary Foundation. But there's still work to be done. We hope the 92 members of our club who have not yet made a donation this year to the Rotary Foundation will be inspired by the generosity of the 19 members of our club who have already given nearly $20,000 this year. So this week, President Carolyn and I have developed an every Rotarian every year progress chart so that club members can track our progress toward reaching President Carolyn's goal of every member giving $25 or more this year. We plan to update this report each month or so. Please feel free to reach out to me if you need assistance making your donation. And again, we want to thank the 19 members of our club who have already donated so generously. So back to you, President Carolyn.
All right, thank you very much, Pat. And just a reminder, I know that early on, some of you may have tried to go on to My Rotary and make your donation. Rotary International was doing a website update. And just as we're all figuring out technology, sometimes when websites are being updated, they're down for a little bit of time, but you'll be able to, it's working now. I know that for a fact because I just made my donation this past week.
President Carolyn, may I interrupt?
Yes.
I feel inspired. I'd like to join the President's Club. That'll help.
Yes, it will. Thank you very much, Dennis. And I will let you know that you can go on to the website. Kathy Coyle, is it already up there now?
No.
No.
But it will be.
But it will be
waiting
shortly.
for the final approval from President
Okay, so
Carolyn.
very shortly, Dennis, we'll be able to direct you to the website where you can click and figure out to do your donation. So thank you very much, Dennis. That's a wonderful way to do that. Okay. And just as a reminder, remember last week or a couple weeks ago, I announced that the area for Rotary clubs, so this is the Rotary clubs in Livermore, Pleasanton, Dublin, Castro Valley, and Hayward, are sponsoring a speaker, and that is tomorrow evening. So if you haven't already registered and would still, you can still do so. And the topic is 100,000 tons of leadership. So the URL is there, and over the weekend, you should have all also received an email with that link in it. So it might be easiest to go back into that email and register for that talk. So now I would like to invite the current board president for the Rotarian Foundation of Livermore, Ted Michaels, to give us an update. Ted.
Hello, Rotarians. Boy, I like that picture a lot better than the current one. Less straight hair. Thanks, Alan. Let's see. Many of you are aware that we have a foundation. It's a 501c3 foundation. It was started in 1987. And over those, 33 years, it has strived to sustainably improve the quality of life for all Livermore Valley residents. Mainly through a lot of grants that have been issued annually to nonprofit groups over the year. So if possible, Alan, I'd like to go to screen share if I can. Let's see if I can get out of the option I'm in here. Okay. And I can go to screen share and do this and do that. Hopefully that's coming through. What the board has decided to do last year was to create, it started out as an annual report. It's now become a report to the Livermore Valley community about what the Rotarian Foundation has done both over the years and more recently. We discovered that the last time a report was done by the foundation was actually 10 years ago by John Gordon when he was president of the foundation. So we've created a report that you'll be getting shortly in an email with a link to the report, which is on the foundation website. But what the report does is talk about the foundation, what it means, what it does, our vision and our mission. Talk something about what we've done both currently and in the past. You see the famous bandstand there is something from a few years ago. Talks about the annual grants we did, the emergency grants, and highlights the fact that in 2020 we gave almost $77,000 in grants from the foundation. Talks about the other programs we do. Last year was the first year of the scholarship program honoring Bill Geyer. And then we do the children's holiday party. Who knows if that's going to happen this year? Probably not. We do the dictionaries to third graders. Probably that's not going to happen this year either. So we'll see where we go with that. And then scholarships to aspiring musicians. And that's been going on for quite a while. We also do STEM scholarships, and that's been going on for a while. And then we have an active investment committee that oversees the funding investments that are done by an outside investment firm. Our club has a strong leadership membership on that. Ken Perrine, Mark Roberts, Kimberly Grudel, and Kathy Streeter are all part of the investment committee that has a large role in making sure we're doing due diligence to oversee the investments that are being made out there. At this point, we have over 1.8 million. Actually, the number has gone up with the way the market has gone recently. And we have reached $1 million, which was the objective of the corpus, of the endowment corpus when it was started in 1987 in the year 2005. To maintain that 1 million, we'd need almost 1.4 million today. And then planning, we've got some goals for the coming year, and then we've also looked at some potential large projects that I'm not sure we're going to get to this year, but a key project that you will be hearing more about is helping with the Livermore School District acquiring Chromebooks. And we're heavily involved in that in partnership with the Livermore Valley Education Foundation. And last but not least, if you're looking for another place to donate money, we take donations. And if you're in the midst of doing your will and you have an extra million or two that you don't know where to put, we will take it from you. So don't forget about us. So I will stop share there. I want to thank all of you for contributing to the foundation. I also want to thank Carol Garrick, who did a lot of the textual layout for what's in here, and Yvonne Hopkins, both from our club, who actually did the layout and publication of this document. So as I said earlier, you'll get an email shortly once David Round sends it out with a link to the report. I encourage you to read it slower than I gave you a chance for here. And look forward to any feedback or comments you might have on it. You've all got my email. And thank you, Carolyn, for the time. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Ted. Thank you very much for that. And then as we just saw, Dennis O'Brien was inspired to join the President's Club. And so that's a $100 to the Rotary Foundation, $100 to the Rotarian Foundation of Livermore, and $50 to the club. So Dennis is already doing his support right there, fed right into Ted's report. Thank you very much, Ted.
Thank you, Dennis. And thank you, Carolyn.
So up next, I just wanted to give you an update, and this is actually inspired by an update from Marty Plone, who, as you know, is a good friend of John Shirley's. So John Shirley, we haven't seen him on Zoom, but he still remembers, has emeritus status with our club. John is now living at the Livermore Valley Senior Living here in town, and he'd love to hear from you. He loves to get cards and letters. Physically, he's remaining strong, though he is in that living center so that he can have extra support just that he needs for where he is cognitively. So I encourage you all to send cards and letters to John, and we always remember our dear John Shirley. So we have a couple minutes. I would like to ask Bob Cowan, can you talk for a moment about the volunteers that you need for Ready?
Well, we've got, I think, 9 volunteers, active volunteers currently. And by the way, to those 9, our first Ready meeting is at 3:30 today. We're doing it, at least the initial meeting, by Google Meets, which isn't the most user-friendly device, and hopefully we'll be switching to Zoom next week. And be prepared, I'm sending you an email at 3:15 with the HTML when we can finally link up. And for you folks that haven't volunteered yet, it's really easy to participate this year because you can just sit at home at your, in your favorite chair with your favorite computer and be a Ready mentor. So I'd really like to hear from you. I'd like to have more than nine folks in the program this year.
Thank you very much, Bob. So reach out to Bob if you'd like to help with that endeavor. And just a couple more quick announcements before we introduce our guest. And the first is for District 5170. So that's our Rotary Club. Area 4 is within District 5170. There is going to be a virtual Avenues of Service, and that will be on Saturday, October 17th. This is just a fun way to find out what projects other clubs are doing and network. So you can register at that link. It'll be included in the spur as well. So you'll be able to click on that link easily. Next, the Rotary Club of Cupertino is offering free courses to Rotarians on the practice of mindful meditation. So if you are interested in that, that starts, that'll be on every Friday, and that'll start next Friday on October 9th and go through December 11th. So if you're interested in there, the email addresses to register for the Rotarians will be in the spur, or you can see it here on the slide as well. And for you golfers who aren't joining, or maybe those who are joining Mike Thompson for our club's golf outing, and you still want to continue to golf, remember the Rotary Club of Livermore is a member of the Livermore Chamber of Commerce, so you're welcome to join that golf tournament that will follow all COVID-19 protocols. And that is sponsored by Fremont Bank, and you can register at livermorechamber.org. And you need to register for that by October 12th. And next week, we know that our grants and our club grants have a huge impact, especially in our school community and our broader community. And you'll be able to hear from all of the grant recipients next week. So you hope you'll join us for that. And I thank Marianne Roja and her team for doing a great job on the fall grant evaluation and awards. So now I would like to invite our club member, Norm Bregman, to introduce our guest speaker today. Norm.
Thank you, Madam President. Today's program idea came from my brother, Bernie Bregman, who became a Rotarian 49 years ago. at the Eastwood Rotary Club in Syracuse and serves as program and membership chair, as well as past president and Paul Harris recipient. I need to also thank Ken for his great work working with my brother to make this come true. His club invited Dr. Helfand to speak way back when with no COVID and the Back from the Brink. And Dr. Helfand drove in from Springfield, Massachusetts in March 19th of 2019. It turned out, according to my brother, to be the most fantastic, dynamic, thought-provoking meeting they ever held. At the conclusion, their Rotary Club agreed to become an endorser and backer for the Back from the Brink. This year, the club asked Dr. Helfand to conduct a Zoom meeting on July 21st and invited the Rotary clubs in the district to join and hear his address. In 2017, Dr. Helfand went to Oslo to receive the Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. Eastwood Rotary spurred a campaign to meet with the mayor of Syracuse, who at the conclusion of the meeting agreed to endorse Back from the Brink. He's challenged us to endorse Back from the Brink and to have other clubs join us so that we could be the first Rotary clubs in the state of California to back from the Brink. This is a national grassroots initiative to fundamentally change U.S. nuclear weapons policy and lead us away from the dangerous path we're on. Dr. Helfand, for many years, has been an emergency room physician and now serves as the internal medicine specialist in the hospital in Massachusetts. He has had a 43-year career. I am proud and honored to have the ability to introduce this wonderful man, Dr. Ira Helfand.
Well, Norm, thank you for that very generous introduction. And thank you all for inviting me to speak with your club today. This has been an extraordinarily difficult year. We are going through the worst epidemic in a century, the worst economic crisis, and I fear it's about to get much worse since the Great Depression, and a year of dramatic political, social upheaval in this country, and ongoing terrible evidence of the persistence of racism in our country. And yet, despite all of these things, I want to talk to you about something else today, because I think that the danger of nuclear war, which has fallen off of our radar screens to a significant degree, remains the greatest threat that we all face and something which we need to attend to. We talk about this as an existential threat, and that's not a figure of speech, and it's not hyperbole. Nuclear weapons, like climate change, pose literal and immediate threats in the case of nuclear weapons to the survival of our civilization and possibly the survival of our species. A generation ago, we all understood that. In the 1980s, we woke up every morning, I think, glad that there hadn't been a nuclear war, fearful that there would be one. And millions of us took part in political activity, educational activity around the country, around the world, to bring about a fundamental change in nuclear policy then, to reverse the Cold War arms race, and to set us on the path of reducing the horribly bloated nuclear arsenals of both the Soviet Union and the United States at that time. It was remarkable because it was successful. Citizen activity in the United States, in Russia, Soviet Union, in Europe, in Japan, in Australia, and other countries brought about a fundamental change. We need to do that again, because the danger is not only not gone away, but according to experts like former Secretary of Defense William Perry, or the experts at the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, the danger is greater today than it has ever been, even in the worst years of the Cold War. There are many reasons for that, and I will just very briefly summarize them. But basically, there are a number of geopolitical flashpoints that could lead to nuclear war. US-Russian relations are the worst they have been since the end of the Cold War. And the decline in those relations is replete with threats on both sides about their nuclear arsenals, with war games in which the use of nuclear weapons is practiced, and with plans on both sides to develop massive new nuclear arsenals with weapons that are more lethal and more usable, more likely to be used. Relations between the United States and China are the worst they've been in 40 years. And that now also has a significant military dimension. Both the US and China are adjusting their military posture with an eye to possible war between these countries in the future. The situation in North Korea is well known to all of us. We pay less attention here in the United States to the situation in South Asia, but I think that may be the most dangerous of all. India and Pakistan have gone to war 4 times since they became independent in the late 1940s, and they came to the brink of war twice last year. Everything that we know says that if there is another open war between India and Pakistan, it will rapidly develop into a nuclear conflict. And as I will describe in a few minutes, that will be a disaster not just for South Asia, but for the entire world, including us here in the United States. In addition to these geopolitical flashpoints, there are several other factors which have increased dramatically the danger of nuclear war. The first among these is the inexorable progress of climate change. We often don't think of these things together, but we need to. US policy has said, and the policy of the other nuclear armed states, that they intend to get rid of their nuclear weapons at some point in the future when the world is safer. The problem is the world isn't getting safer, it's getting more dangerous. And it is largely the destruction of our environment through climate change that is making the world more dangerous. And over the next coming decades, even if we do absolutely everything that we are supposed to do to cut carbon emissions, the continued rise in temperature across the planet will render large portions of the planet unable to support the human population. And the potential for conflict, for internal conflict within countries, for wars between states, for migration on a scale that we have never seen in all of human history will grow. And if nuclear weapons are on the table in this incredibly unstable environment that we are about to see, the chance that they will be used will be greater. Another consideration that we need to take into account is the threat of cyber terrorism. We used to think that the most dangerous thing that a terrorist group could do would be to get hold of maybe 1, maybe 2, probably relatively small nuclear warheads and use them to cause terrible damage in one city, New York, or Washington, or Moscow, or London, or Tel Aviv. What we now understand is that nuclear weapons can be used in a much more terrible way by terrorists. They can carry out a cyber attack, potentially, and hack into the command and control systems of one or another of the nuclear armed states, and either directly cause the launch of that nation's weapons, or more likely, trigger a false alarm, make the country that is being hacked believe that it is under nuclear attack from one of its enemies, and induce that country to launch a retaliatory attack, something which is made easier by the fact that many of the nuclear armed states, including the US, maintain their arsenals on hair trigger alert, mounted on weapons that can be launched in less than 15 minutes. So for all of these reasons, the danger of nuclear war has grown. And again, the experts are telling us it is greater now than it was during the Cold War. We've also learned in recent years that the consequences of nuclear war will be even more terrible than we once believed. We used to think that only a large-scale war between the United States and the Soviet Union would pose a threat to the entire world. But we now know that even a limited war, as might take place between India and Pakistan, would cause worldwide devastation. The most recent study to look at this, which was published in September of last year, showed that if, under current conditions, India and Pakistan went to war and used their nuclear arsenals against urban industrial targets in the other countries, something between 75 and 125 million people would die in South Asia in the first week as a result of the explosions, the fires, the radiation. That's only a small part of the story, because the huge firestorms started by these weapons would loft something between 15 and 35 million tons of soot into the upper atmosphere, blocking out the sun and dropping temperatures across the entire planet up to 5 degrees centigrade. This would cause dramatic declines in food production and trigger a global famine, which studies have shown would put up to 2 billion, with a B, 2 billion people at risk of starvation. An event of this magnitude is unprecedented in human history. It would not mean the extinction of our species. It would mean the end of civilization as we know it. No civilization in all of history has ever withstood a shock of this magnitude, and there is no reason to believe that the very complex, fragile economic system that we all depend on to put food on our tables, to heat our homes, to clothe us, there's no reason to believe that that system could survive a disruption of this magnitude. Now, this is not some abstract problem. It's not something to worry about in the future. India and Pakistan, like the United States and Russia, could go to war today while we're having this conversation. And we have to understand that as long as we allow nuclear arsenals to live, as long as we allow these enormous weapons to remain in our arsenals, this danger will continue. We have been taught to believe that there is something magical about nuclear weapons, that somehow they're so destructive that they will perfectly and permanently deter their use. They have this magic power that they will never be used. The facts don't bear that out. In fact, everything that we know from the nuclear weapons era suggests the fallacy of this faith that we have placed in the deterrent ability of these weapons. We know, for example, of at least 7 occasions when either Moscow or Washington actually began the process of launching their nuclear arsenal, always in the mistaken belief that they were under attack by the other side. But on each and every one of those occasions, the country that was preparing to launch its weapons had abandoned deterrence. It had concluded that deterrence had failed and was planning to launch nuclear war. As a result of this and other incidences during the Cold War, former Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara concluded that it was not because of our wise leaders or our sound doctrines or our perfect technology that we had survived the nuclear weapons era. It was because, and I'm quoting him, we lucked out. It was luck that prevented nuclear war, end quote. And I would argue that the current policy of the United States, Russia, and the other nuclear armed states is nothing more than a hope for continued good luck, which is an absolutely insane basis for global security policy. Our luck will run out. We are living on borrowed time, and sooner or later, and perhaps sooner, the apocalypse which we all fear will happen. Now, why talk to you about this? Why ruin your day with all of this gloom and doom? Because this is not the future that needs to be. Nuclear weapons are not a force of nature. It's not like there's an asteroid coming at us from outer space. These are little machines about the size of the chair that I'm sitting in. We've built them with our own hands, and we know how to take them apart. All that is missing is the political will to do that. And we need to summon that political will. We need to bring about that change. Rotary, about 30 years ago, made a decision that polio could be eradicated from the world. This was a political decision. It required a global vaccination program that was opposed by many people. We had Rotary volunteers who lost their lives in places like Nigeria and Afghanistan trying to carry out this program. We need to make the same commitment today to eradicate the world of this even greater threat to public health. Most of the time when I talk to people, part of the problem is that they feel alone. This is a big problem. And they feel, what can one person do about this? That's not the case for those of us who belong to Rotary. We are part of a network, a family of 1,200,000 members across the entire planet. And if we all work together, just as we eradicated polio, we can eradicate nuclear weapons. Now, there are some important international and national initiatives that we can work with. Internationally, 122 nations signed in 2017 the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Sometime in the next month, the 50th country will ratify that treaty and it will enter into force. Rotarians around the world are raising their voices, urging their governments to sign this treaty. Here in the United States, we've launched something called the Back from the Brink campaign. This is an effort, as Norm suggested earlier, to bring about the fundamental change in US nuclear policy that we need so that the United States and the other nuclear armed countries can come into compliance with that treaty and get rid of their weapons. It's based on a platform with 5 planks. Most important of these is the call for the United States to enter now into negotiations with all of the other nuclear armed states for verifiable, enforceable, time-bound agreement to eliminate the remaining weapons in their arsenals. There are also 4 steps, interim steps, that the US could take to lessen the danger in the meantime. We can and we should take our weapons off hair trigger alert. We should adopt a policy of no first use, making it clear that we will never start a nuclear war. We should end the situation where the President of the United States has the unchecked authority to launch nuclear war without requiring the consent of the Congress, the Cabinet, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Vice President, anybody. And we should abandon plans to spend $1.7 trillion over the next 30 years, modernizing every aspect of our nuclear arsenal and guaranteeing that we try to maintain these weapons for decades and decades to come. I don't know if we'll be successful. None of us do. I do know what's going to happen if we're not successful. At some point, the horrible things I've talked about are going to take place. And then it's going to be too late for us to say we wish we'd done something different. And so I would call on all of you to join in this effort. I would call on you as citizens to do what you can individually, and I would call on you as Rotarians to help figure out how we can raise the collective voice of Rotary across the planet in this really desperate struggle to save our civilization from the terrible danger which it faces. I haven't talked to you about what would happen if the United States and Russia went to war. Let me just add one little coda to the picture that I've described already. A war between the United States and Russia would not put 15 to 35 million tons of soot into the upper atmosphere. It would put 150 million tons of soot into the upper atmosphere. And that would drop temperatures across the entire planet, an average of 14 degrees Fahrenheit. In the interior regions of North America and Eurasia, the temperatures would drop 45 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. For 3 years, there would not be a single day free of frost. The temperature would go below freezing for some portion of every single day. And under those conditions, all the ecosystems which have evolved since the end of the last ice age would collapse. Food production would stop, and the vast majority of the human race would starve to death. Under these conditions, it is possible that we would become extinct as a species. And again, this is not the plot of a grade B movie. This is the danger we are living with every day. And it's up to us whether we continue to run this risk or whether we take decisive action and end this crazy situation so that our children and our grandchildren can enjoy the future which should be theirs to enjoy. Let me stop and take any questions that people might have, and I hope I'll open the floor to some discussion about what people's reaction is and what they would like to do about all of this. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Helfand. We did have one question in the chat, so if you have questions, I ask you to use the raise your hand function in the participants or put your questions in the chat. I'll also try to watch the Zoom screen for people raised hands as well. So the first question actually comes from Hank, and he wanted you to wanted to know what is the extent of the reduction in the number of US nuclear weapons over the last 50 years.
Well, at its peak, the US arsenal was about 30,000 warheads. And currently we have about, depends how you count them, but about 4,000. About 1,550 are deployed and the rest are in storage. And that's very dramatic. And it's a huge step in the right direction. The problem is that the 1,500 that remain deployed are still more than enough to kill all of us. And so in that most fundamental sense, nothing has changed. Although we have demonstrated that we know how to dismantle the weapons, that we know how to do it in a verifiable way. The Russians are confident that we have dismantled the weapons that we promised to dismantle, and we're confident that they have dismantled the weapons that they were supposed to dismantle. So in that sense, it is a very important step in the right direction.
All right. What other questions do we have for our guest? Or reactions from his comments? Okay, here's another question, sorry. I'm looking here. You mentioned the possible nuclear exchange between India and Pakistan as a particularly worrisome flashpoint. What steps would you envision to gain leverage to convince them?
I think the most important step we need to take is to make an unequivocal commitment to abandoning our own nuclear arsenal. The United States finds it very difficult to tell countries like India and Pakistan that we, the most powerful country in the world in conventional military forces, need nuclear weapons for our security, but you don't need them for yours. And I think we need to lead by example. Doesn't mean we disarm first. It means we engage with all the nuclear armed states simultaneously in a multilateral negotiation that we all get rid of our weapons together. There are a number of countries that are going to be very tough to convince that they to follow this path. Pakistan believes that its survival as a country is at stake. Israel has the same view, and the regime in North Korea believes that the regime's survival is at stake. And we're going to have to address these security concerns that these countries have. We're also going to have to address the security concerns that the US and Russia have about each other. But this can be done, and we certainly need to try doing it. So I think with regards to India and Pakistan, the most important thing we can do is to commit that we are going to follow the same path we're urging them to follow, and then we need to sit down with them and work out the details of what it will take to make both of those countries feel secure that the other country is not going to attack them.
Okay, another question in the chat is how many countries have verified nuclear weapons?
There are believed to be 9 nuclear weapon states. The United States and Russia have the vast majority, about 90% of the nuclear weapons in the world. The other members of the UN Security Council, the UK, France, and China have nuclear weapons. India and Pakistan have nuclear weapons. Israel has never acknowledged its nuclear arsenal, but is generally understood to have nuclear weapons. And North Korea has nuclear weapons. So 9 countries altogether.
All right.
I was just going to say, South Africa did have nuclear weapons and chose to give them up. Kazakhstan and Ukraine had nuclear weapons when the Soviet Union broke apart and chose to return those weapons to Russian care.
Okay, and then a follow-up question kind of to the reduction in number of weapons over the last 50 years. You answered the question about the US reductions. How about Russia and China or the other nuclear countries?
The Russians had somewhat more nuclear weapons than we did. They're down to the same number. I think they peaked out at about 45,000. They're down to also less than 1,500 deployed, and total about 5,000 to 6,000. The other countries, the French arsenal is about 300 to 400 weapons. The Chinese is thought to be 200 to 300 weapons. The UK has just under 200. India and Pakistan are thought to have about 150 warheads each. Israel is thought to have about 80 warheads, though there's less certainty about that. And North Korea, we're not sure, but the guess is a dozen or something in that range.
Okay, and as you are probably well aware, Lawrence Livermore National Lab is here in Livermore, and a number of retirees and employees are members of our club. And so this question will be a little bit controversial. It comes from a non-club member. Approximately 85% of the lab's budget, and so I'm not verifying the facts of this question, I'm asking it as written. Approximately 85% of the lab's budget is dedicated to stockpile stewardship. what can we as Livermore residents do to address this?
I think that it would be particularly powerful if people from Livermore said that we need to get rid of these nuclear weapons. This is a huge part of your local economy. It is not worth putting the survival of the entire human civilization at risk to maintain that. There's going to need to be a process whereby communities that have become economically dependent on the nuclear enterprise are helped to transition to other forms of economic activity that are more healthy. There will be still a significant role for the labs over the next 10 or 15 years in helping to oversee the dismantlement process if we do succeed in reaching an agreement with the other nuclear armed states. But there will come a time when these weapons have all been dismantled. And so we need to be thinking about the transition that will need to take place in the economy in Livermore. And I think it's important to understand that there are many people in all the nuclear armed states who have worked on these weapons in the sincere hope that they would never be used, in many cases in the belief that by maintaining these weapons, as I mentioned before, that they would deter use and they would preserve the peace. The problem is twofold. One, deterrence has to be perfect. If it fails once, the whole game is over. And secondly, we also need to acknowledge that while most of us tend to think that we only have nuclear weapons in order to deter nuclear attack by another country, in fact, the United States and several of the other nuclear armed states make it quite clear that they envision using nuclear weapons first, under certain circumstances, that they would consider starting a nuclear war. And the drift over the last several years amongst almost all of the nuclear armed states has been to design and develop more usable nuclear weapons that will lower that threshold, that barrier that we have not crossed since Nagasaki, although we have threatened to cross it on many occasions.
And I just draw your attention to the chat that if there are people have more questions and want to connect with this afterwards, Dr. Bob Gould is a colleague of our speaker and is happy to connect with people afterwards. So look at their local work and for the email addresses that he has in there. So that you can see those. Another question from the chat is, you mentioned security concerns being a big barrier to progress in reducing nuclear arsenal. Suggestion on how that starts.
The security concerns. You know, I think this is the part that's going to be most complicated because the concerns are different for different countries. Pakistan is much smaller than India, and it knows that it would lose a conventional war with India. And so we need to, in some way, convince the Pakistani government that we will provide adequate security assurances. The same is true for Israel. Although it is stronger than any one of its neighbors, it lives with a siege mentality and understands that someday it could lose a war, which could mean the destruction of the country. We need to allay those concerns. And this is the part that's going to take a lot of work on the part of diplomats and citizens, with citizen diplomacy as well as formal government level diplomacy. And again, we cannot guarantee that we're going to be successful. The United States could decide we are going to commit to the abolition of nuclear weapons, could try to initiate these negotiations, and it might fail. One or more of these countries might say we won't go along with it. But we've never tried, and we've never actually wanted to try. The United States has never sought, in practice, the abolition of nuclear weapons. It's always talked about it as some long-term, way in the future goal, but it has never actively worked with the goal of eliminating all nuclear weapons. And that's the fundamental change that we need to bring about. That's the commitment that we as a nation need to make, that we are not going to continue to hold the entire world hostage to our nuclear arsenal and the nuclear arsenals of other countries.
So there's a comment in the chat that I'll share from Lynn Sepla for you to comment on. In 2008, Michael May, former Lawrence Livermore National Lab Director, and William Perry, former Defense secretary, spoke at the Ray Duro speaker series and presented an opposite position scenario. May said that nukes have prevented world wars for 60 years. Perry said an accident is guaranteed to happen, and I agree with them both.
Well, it is possible that in certain circumstances over the last 60 years, the existence of nuclear arsenals have caused people to pause. But as I said, and as Secretary Perry argues all the time, one mistake and the whole game's over. We have come perilously close to nuclear weapons on multiple occasions. And on some of the occasions when we began the process of launching our nuclear arsenal, we were literally minutes away from nuclear Armageddon. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, you know, the people who ran the show in both the Soviet Union and the United States, when they sat down together some years later in Cuba to review what had happened there, they were horrified about the misinformation on which they had been basing their decisions and the limitation of their ability to know what they were doing, which had brought us so close to nuclear war. I think that we take perhaps too much comfort from the fact that nuclear weapons have not been used against a city since Nagasaki. That was 75 years ago. I'm 71. I haven't died yet. It doesn't mean I'm not going to die. It means it hasn't happened yet. And I think that's the way we need to look at the nuclear situation. The United States not only dropped the bomb on Nagasaki, but we have threatened to use these weapons on multiple occasions since. We threatened to use them against China during the Korean War. We threatened to use them against China during the standoff in the Formosa Straits in the late 1950s. We planned to use them against Vietnam at the height of the Vietnam War. We made threats to use them during the Iranian Revolution. We refused to take them off the table during both of the Gulf Wars. And we are now working to develop more usable weapons. It doesn't sound to me like these weapons are a sure bet to guarantee that they will never be used. It sounds like just the opposite. We're moving in a very dangerous direction towards an ever greater chance that they will be used.
So I do want to say that it is just past 1:30, which is the end of our meeting. But I think, Dr. Helfand, are you available for people who want to stay on longer and ask additional questions, or what is your time?
Yes, as you can see, I'm in my clinic, but
Okay.
I've got another half an hour before I have to get back to seeing
Okay.
patients. So I'm
But I
happy to
do
stay on
want to
call.
let people know, I thank you for opening this important dialogue. There are obviously a lot of opinions on both sides of this issue, as have been expressed in the chat. I think one of the things in Rotary is just to open up dialogue. So thank you very much. So those of you who need to go ahead, but I will ask you, Dr. Helfand, sorry, to comment on Dennis's comment, and that was, I agree that nuclear weapons are an existential threat. They were developed to counter another existential threat, the Nazi and Japanese threat. They were further developed to counter the Soviet existential threat. Europe has largely enjoyed peace under the threat of nuclear weapons, and the only time since tribes walked into Europe. I also agree that we need to get rid of nukes so that we can reduce, but we can only reduce towards zero nukes as we can replace it with other assurances that other existential threats are similarly reduced towards zero. Your comment on that?
Sure, and before I do it, if people are going off, I do want to just call attention to the website for the Back from the Brink campaign, preventnuclearwar.org, which I put in the chat column as well. Thank you for that comment and question. With regards to the preservation of peace in Europe, I don't know to what extent nuclear weapons have preserved the peace in Europe since the end of World War II. I mean, the people of Bosnia, the people of East Ukraine certainly don't feel that they're living through a particularly peaceful period of time. We went from Waterloo until Sarajevo, 99 years without a general war in Europe at a time when there were no nuclear weapons. So nukes may have, as I said earlier, they may have on some occasions been somewhat sobering to some of the decision makers, but I think we have the evidence that even Europe, as difficult as it has been, even Europe can maintain peace without nuclear weapons. They've done it before and for an extended period of time. The only other existential threat that I know of at this time is climate change. And nuclear weapons do nothing to protect us from climate change. In fact, they pose the threat of a very abrupt climate crisis in the opposite direction, a global cooling event that would be absolutely catastrophic. I do think, so I think we do need to continue to figure out and work on how we reduce the tension in the various parts of the world that have nuclear weapons. We're going to have to address those security questions, and I totally agree with the comment in that regard. We are going to need to address that if we're going to get everyone to give up their nuclear arms. But again, you know, it really just comes down to the bottom line. Everybody who looks at this closely says that it is only a matter of time until these weapons are used. So we don't have a choice. We either do this or we doom our planet to destruction. And that really is up to us. I mean, we are making this decision. We're either going to choose life or we're going to choose death. And we have to do this.
All right. I think David Rounds mentioned that he's going to send an email. There were a number of links that were recommended and contact information. Mariella Kelly, from the Executive Director of Tri-Valley Communities Against Radioactive Environment, is on the call, and she can be contacted as well, and as a source to follow up. Any other questions? Sorry, it's hard for me to look in this. Any other hand raises? I don't see anybody or anybody on the screen with a question. Whoop. Oh.
One other comment I would just offer, if I could, Carolyn. There is a group formed within Rotary called Rotarians for Nuclear Ban. We're going through some name changes. We may come out calling ourselves Rotarians to Prevent Nuclear War. But this is a group of Rotarians from around the world, many here in the United States and Canada, but we have members in South Asia, in Japan, in Russia, in other countries who want to figure out how we can raise Rotary's voice to bring about this fundamental change in nuclear power or nuclear policy around the world. And I've put up my email address as well in the chat. If you're interested in being part of this group within Rotary, please get in touch with me, and I will get your name passed on to the people who are keeping the listserv for the group. It's an informal grouping at this point. We're still feeling our way. We're looking for new members, and we're trying to figure out how we can take this organization, which is so committed to service above self and so committed to peace and conflict resolution, and bring it to bear on the greatest problem facing the world today.
All right, one other question. Sorry, I saw that Kathy Streeter, did you have a question? Kathy, are you still on?
Yes, I am. I'm very concerned about what kind of role the UN might have in this and whether it's paying attention to it at all.
The UN was the venue at which the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was negotiated in 2017. And it is doing the best it can, given the fact that the 5 permanent members of the Security Council who have an outsized voice at the UN are all nuclear powers, nuclear weapons powers, who have made it clear that for the time being, they intend to continue to maintain their nuclear arsenals. But 122 nations at the UN voted in favor of this treaty in July of 2017. 84 have formally signed it. 46, as of this morning, have ratified the treaty. And when the 50th country ratifies the treaty, which will probably be on October 23rd, the day before UN Day, when the 50th country ratifies the treaty, it enters into force. And the possession of nuclear weapons will be deemed to be illegal in international law, as will any work to promote the design, the development, the transport, the finance of nuclear weapons. So the UN is playing a vigorous role. And this is a point of entry for Rotary. We are one of only 2 NGOs in the world that has formal status at the UN. That status carries with it major responsibilities to address the great questions before the UN. The UN has adopted this position, and I think that's a strong argument why Rotary can and should lend its weight to these efforts. The only other NGO that has this kind of standing at the UN is the International Committee of the Red Cross, which has been working tirelessly to educate people about the danger of nuclear war and to support the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons.
All right, and I know that Brian Mayle, you had a question as well.
Thank you very much for your talk. I thought it was most interesting. The question I have is, we're always facing another potential existential threat, and I was surprised that you as a physician didn't mention it, which is global pandemics. And I think we've got off very lightly with the coronavirus SARS-2 epidemic. It could have been very much worse and very much more devastating. And I think this is a global threat. And I was wondering how that would, how the recognition of these, such an extensional global threat could alter countries' thoughts about nuclear weapons.
Thank you, Brian. I think it's a great question. And it has been my hope that our experience in the last year will help people to understand the need to address the nuclear problem. As you suggested, we have been warned for decades that it was only a matter of time until there was another great pandemic. And we got off kind of light this time, as horrible as this is being. It could have been something which had a much higher fatality rate. And such an epidemic will undoubtedly occur in the future. We ignored what the experts said. They told us that we needed to prepare for a pandemic, and we didn't do it. And to the extent that we did do it here in the United States, the work that was done under previous administrations was undone by the current administration. We need to listen. When the experts tell us that we're going to have a nuclear war if we don't get rid of these weapons, we need to listen to that. And I'm hoping that this experience will make people more prone to accept the warnings. You know, part of the problem is we find it so hard to get our arms around these existential threats. We can understand intellectually that there can be an even worse pandemic than the one we're going through now. We can understand intellectually that nuclear war can happen tomorrow and destroy our civilization, but we don't really believe it. You know, I mean, I go about my daily life as though this threat didn't exist. And I talk about it and lecture about it and write about it all the time. It's a very hard, it's a big leap for us to get it in our gut, to understand that this really can happen and we really need to do something about it. And so perhaps the experience of living through this pandemic will help us make that leap of imagination to understand that we are not talking here about abstractions. We're talking about a real, concrete, imminent, and present danger.
So at that, Ira, I think that we'll conclude our meeting today. It sounds like this was, from the comments, thought-provoking, spark thought-provoking discussions that can follow on. As I said before, David Rounds will share email contacts with people who would like to continue those discussions. And I am sure that there are other people in our club who would be happy to share their opinions and engage in dialogue with you. Just reach out to them. Thank you all for joining us today for another meeting of the Rotary Club of Livermore. And thank you very much, Ira, for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking the time and meeting with us today.
It's been a pleasure, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk with you all today. Thank you.